now let's take a look at tests that we can use from the syntax, in other words, from the sentence structure, to see whether we have a noun, verb, adjective, adverb, etc. So in other words, this is the second set of tests that we're going to look at. On your handout, it comes underneath all of the morphological evidence, and it starts with syntactic evidence. So look at the first example here. It says a test for nouns is that it can appear in subject position. So in other words, if it can appear in this position, blank might be interesting, then that thing is going to be a noun. So for example, what could we say? We could say Paul might be interesting. Therefore, Paul, we know for sure, is a noun. Or for example, if you say swimming might be interesting. In this sentence, swimming, although it looks like a verb because it has ing, is actually functioning as a noun because we're talking about the whole event of swimming. So swimming in general. And it's serving as a subject of the sentence. So you know 100% this has got to be a noun. Cats might be interesting. Biology might be interesting. Linguistics, we know is interesting, so we're not going to put that in that sentence. But anything that you can fit into that pattern, blank might be interesting, you know for sure 100% it's got to be a noun. So that is your syntactic test to know whether you have a noun or not. So now you have two morphological tests, the plural marker and the apostrophe S, the genitive marker, and you have one syntactic test to know whether you have a noun. So what about verbs? If you have a sequence such as they can, and then you can have a word following that. So for example, they can sleep. You know that this word must be a verb. Anything that can occur in the position following can in this sentence, they can blank, that must be a verb. So they can sleep, they can eat, they can cry, they can die, right? You could go on and on and on, thinking of many different examples of words that could fit into that position. All of those are going to be verbs. If you tried to put something else in there, so if you tried to say they can bad, you know, you try to put an adjective in that position, it's not going to work. That doesn't sound like an English sentence. They can bad, or they can badly, right? If you put an adverb there. So this shows us that the position after the modal auxiliary can is a position in which we find verbs, in other words, main verbs. So what about the following position? Blank, I be Frank. This is a position in which we find auxiliary verbs. And auxiliary verbs are sometimes what are called helping verbs. They are a type of verb that appear along with a main verb. So whenever you have an auxiliary verb, you always have a main verb. That's the most important thing to keep in mind about auxiliary verbs. They can never occur on their own. If you have a sentence and it has one verb, you know that verb must be the main verb because every sentence has a main verb, but not every sentence has an auxiliary verb. So if you have a sentence like, John ran to the store, the verb there is ran. It's in the past tense, so you know that it's a verb for sure. And what's going on in terms of anything preceding it? John ran to the store. There's nothing else preceding it that seems to be functioning along with it as a verb. However, if you said John might run to the store, now might run is functioning as a unit. Might is the auxiliary verb that goes along with the main verb run. So auxiliary verbs pattern differently than main verbs. They can occur in different positions from main verbs. So for example, if you say, may I be frank? May I be frank? That's a possible sentence, therefore you know that the word may in this sentence is an auxiliary verb. If you had another auxiliary verb, something like can. Can I be frank? Right, so these are the guys that we sometimes call helping verbs. They are verbs that appear with main verbs. They are not main verbs themselves. What else could you have here? Should. Should I be frank? Could, would. Right, so all of these guys that can appear in this position, you know they are auxiliary verbs. If you're wondering whether something is an auxiliary verb, try to put it in this position. If you can, your answer is yes.